Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland. With me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome to a brand new episode of Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. The title of today's episode was going to be 10 easy ways to create your wedding guest list. But then I realized there's nothing easy about deciding who will and won't attend your wedding. But we're going to make it as easy as possible. I'm going to work you through 10 logical steps for how you can create your guest list. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be logical. It's going to help you make decisions. I'm going to help you work out exactly who you can invite, and I'm going to give you some hacks along the way. Let's start with the first one. Crunch the numbers. Now, before you can work out who to invite, you need to know how many people you can invite. So you're going to want to talk to your wedding venue to see what the capacity is. You're going to want to consult your budget so that you can see what you can afford. And you are going to come up with a number of how many people you can invite. Even if you haven't booked your venue yet, this is a bit of a chicken or egg situation that we speak about every once in a while. You could decide how many guests you want to invite and then choose a venue that can accommodate them, or you can choose your dream venue and then you create a guest list that fits with the venue. It doesn't really matter which way you go about doing it. It depends on your priorities. It depends on where you're at in the wedding planning journey, and there really is no wrong way to do it. But the key here is that you can't invite people without knowing how many of them you can actually have at the wedding. Step number 2, talk to your parents. Now, these days, there's less pressure to accommodate the guests that your parents want to have. You don't need to have, 50% of your guest list laid out for your friends of your parents, but you do want to ask your parents if there's anybody that they would like to include. It could be things like distant relatives that you haven't thought of. And you could have an agreement with your parents and your other half's parents about how many people or the percentage of the guest list that they have to allocate to some of those family members that you wouldn't want to necessarily invite. Divvy it up however you want to, whatever you think is fair. But the key here is to include your parents in the conversation before you send out save the dates, in case they come with a list and you've got to have some awkward conversations where you just actually can't fit them in. So include your parents in the conversation. It could be family, friends that you've grown up with that you think, of course, we'll have them there. That makes perfect sense. Or it could be some people that you actually don't know, you've never met, but you're happy to accommodate them. Particularly if your parents are paying for a portion of the wedding, it's helpful to honor that contribution by allowing them to invite some special people to your wedding. Step number 3, this is huge. Make some rules. Okay, things like this. Are children invited to the wedding? And if so, is it all children? Or is it children under or over a certain age? Is it children just of the immediate family? What about things like who gets a +1? Generally, if a guest is married, whether you've met their spouse or not, they should get a +1. If they're engaged or in a serious relationship, the rules are the same. But your rules could be different. It could be that, single guests who are on the wedding party should get a +1. Whatever the rule is, have a rule for that. What about exes? Unless there are children involved, it's normally recommended that you don't include exes, even if there was like a drama-free breakup, but it's totally your call. But what you need to work out is your rules for these things, and they have to be consistent. So if you're saying we're having no children at the wedding, then it would be unfair to make an exception because somebody else who's organized childcare will come to the wedding and see a child and think, well, why was their child invited and not mine? So if you want to make sure that you don't offend anyone, either on the day or when people get their invitations, having a blanket rule will help you. It also helps you to know how many people you can actually have on your guest list when you know what those rules are and what the numbers are that you are working with. Step number 4, create your dream list. Now, your dream list is a list of everybody that you would love to have at your wedding. So if budget is not an issue, if capacity at the venue is not an issue, who do you want there? So write out every single person you could possibly want at your wedding, and that is a really good starting point. You can brainstorm all the different categories of people. And in the next step, I'll help you work out what these categories are. But you basically want to make sure you don't forget anyone. So if we move on to step 5, these are the categories that you could think of. And there's method to my madness, I promise. We'll get there in a moment. It could be that your dream list is broken up into immediate family, close friends, friends you see often, family friends, work colleagues, distant relatives, it could be college friends, it could be school friends. You can divide that list up into the categories that make sense to you. But where it's going to help is a bit later on, you might have to make a decision between this category and this category. For example, you may need to choose between work friends and distant relatives. And so if you know which category you're going to include, then you've already grouped everyone together and you can just put that whole group onto your list. Number 6, group your categories. And now this is going to feel a little bit mean, but let me emphasize this by saying that this is a very internal step. This is not a public thing. You're not going to tell people which group they're in, but for you and your partner to understand who you're prioritizing if you need to, it's helpful to have an A list and a B list and an, if necessary, a C list. So the A list is the people that you can't imagine not having at your wedding. Like, you will go to the ends of the earth to get these people there. The people on your B list are people that you really want there. And the people on your C list are people that if you could have them there, it would be so good. So these are all friends and family. They're all people that you love, but you just have to have a little bit of an awkward internal conversation with your other half about how you're going to divvy these people up. And sometimes you need to categorize them. Some will be super obvious. Like for most people, your siblings and your besties, they're on the A list. And your C list could be, your work friends, people that if you don't invite any of them, they're not going to be offended. Step number 7, start counting. Okay, so add up your totals, and if you're lucky, you're going to have some kind of a natural cutoff point. So start with your non-negotiables, like your A list, so it's your immediate family, that kind of thing. Fill in the remaining spots with your B list, and then if you can't include the whole list, you move on to step 8, which is cut, cut, cut. When you're creating your guest list, this is absolutely the worst part. It's the one that everybody dreads. But it's actually kind of important. And if you did what we did a few steps earlier and you have a whole category, it could be easy to just cut out a whole category. For example, if you're making a decision between distant relatives and work colleagues, you could just have the reason if you had to cut out all your work colleagues, you just say, well, unfortunately, we couldn't invite everybody because we're having a family-only wedding. And people understand that. So if you don't know how to make that decision, go back to those A list, B list, and C list categories, and that will help you to see which groups that you should cut out. It's going to be hard no matter what you do. You can also refer back to your rules. So if you were going to invite children and you look at the numbers and realize, actually, if we cut out all the children, we can get everybody in. And then you change your rule where you say this is a child-free wedding. Moving on to step number 8, you can send out your save the dates. And this is a little bit controversial, but I reckon if you send out your save the dates early enough and people start coming back and saying, I wish I could come, but unfortunately I can't, that then creates a bit of space where you could then add in some guests who you previously couldn't include, and they are now on the invitation list. Now, pre-COVID, it was completely normal for about 20% of your guest list not to be able to come. But the key is that you need to do this process early. So normally your wedding invitations go out about 6 weeks before the wedding. And we have a previous episode where we walk through the timing of all of that. So when to send the invitations and when to get the RSVPs in. I always recommend save the dates as early as possible. Basically, as soon as you have a date and a venue confirmed, you could send your save the dates, even if it's a year or so out. It just means that people have a chance to literally save the date. And if somebody can't save the date because they've been invited to another event or a wedding, or they're going to be away for whatever reason, it means that you then have space on your guest list and you can start to include some people who previously couldn't fit. Now, if you do it early, people will receive it well. Sometimes they don't even know that they were never on the list. But if you do it like a week before the wedding and somebody has said no, and then you phone someone and say, hey, we'd love to have you, people don't always respond well. Some people, if they know that they were on the C list because they don't know you super well and they never really expected to come to the wedding anyway, Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to be there. That's such a treat. But other people start to feel a bit like a rent-a-crowd if they get invited at the last minute. So the key here is to get your save the dates out early so you can make sure that you're not unintentionally offending people by inviting them a little bit later than everybody else. Your final step is damage control. Okay, so far so good, but you may have a few hurt feelings to deal with, especially if you have guests who assume that they'd be invited and then they aren't, or if people are surprised that they don't get a +1 or that their children aren't included. Just remember that you put those rules in place early on with no children or no +1s for anyone, whatever that rule is, so that you can go back and say, it's not only you, I promise, it's just we can only have so many people at the wedding and we decided that we'd love to have all our friends there, and if we don't have children, we're going to miss your children. It's not that we don't love you or them, it's just a rule we had to put in place. That way you can be diplomatic and it's not a personal thing, it's not about that person or their children, it's just a blanket rule for everybody. Well, let me quickly run through those steps with you. When you create your guest list, if you want to do it without going absolutely crazy, first start by crunching the numbers. You want to know who you can invite. Talk to your parents to check you haven't missed anybody. Make some rules. Be consistent with them. Create your dream list of everyone you want there. Divide them into those categories, distant relatives, work friends, besties. Group your categories. That's where we spoke about the A list, the B list, and the C list. Start counting. And if you need to, move on to the next step, which is to cut. Send out your save the dates. And finally, if you need to, do some damage control. Well, thank you for listening today. The Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast is produced by me, Kelly, and mixed, mastered, and edited by Glenn Hartman. For more wedding planning tips, advice, checklists, and more, visit weddingsonline.ie.